So, I hope that's helping. Like, I'm not just like some guy going like, oh, the Masons did it. I know some things about stuff sometimes. If this form of symbolism had a biblical flavor, it was not exclusively Christian. After the religious passions of the preceding century, the mood favored a rejection of dogma and a tolerance of any personal belief that did not exclude the idea of a supreme being. Deism, syncretic belief in God, distinct from the theological doctrine, was widespread among the educated people and the wealthier classes from which Freemasonry drew its members, until a more orthodox Christian faith became socially necessary in the 19th century. This religious tolerance was reflected in the first Masonic Book of Constitutions, 1722-23, which laid down that Masons might belong to any religious sect, but that they could not be atheists. You have to believe in God to be a Mason. You have to believe in the guy that built the battery. It is thought more expedient. It is thought more expedient only to oblige them to that religion in which all men agree, leaving their particular opinions to themselves. The constitutions, which included an elaborated version of the old charges, are drawn up by a minister of the Church of Scotland, Dr. James Anderson, 1684 to 1739. They are the documents that first formulated the patterns of Masonic ritual and symbolism. So it looks like the title page to Anderson's Constitutions and the frontispiece, which includes a diagram of Euclid's 47th proposition. It had enabled stonemasons to find a simple method of checking right angles, and was represented here as the secret of the craft. I would like to interject. Allow me to. Anyways, they are the documents that first formulated the patterns of Masonic ritual and symbolism. They were prepared at the request of the new United Grand Lodge, which had been formed in 1717 by the union of 4 London lodges, and which found fault with all the copies of the old Gothic constitutions. The authority of the United Grand Lodge soon extended throughout England. Scotland and Ireland had their own Grand Lodges, and even to lodges in the colonies. Its formation and the publication of Anderson's Constitutions marked the beginning of modern Freemasonry. Both the Masonic legend of Hiram Abiff, described as King Solomon's master builder, and the hierarchy of Freemasonry with the Grand Master at the top of the pyramid, and the provincial Grand Masters in its various districts date from about this time. Anderson's Constitutions, however, met with a bitter opposition from some of the existing lodges, whose members objected to the rules and ceremonies in their revised form. In 1751, these dissenting members, known as the Ancients, formed a rival Grand Lodge with its own Grand Master under the old institutions. The Ancients were not recognized in England, but they were both recognized and favored by Grand Lodges of Scotland and Ireland. Reunion was not achieved until 1813, though an agreement between the rival Grand Masters, the Duke of Sussex and the Duke of Kent, who were brothers of George IV. The points at issue were to have been settled by a professor of the art and mystery of speculative Freemasonry. God, that's a great title. But the two princes never appointed a professor. That's me. That's the nickname. People call me the professor sometimes. That's better than Black Kevin or Beast Fucker. In spite of this, fuck. In spite of this dissension, the 18th century saw an enormous growth of Freemasonry. As the Duke of Montague, Grand Master in 1721, wrote in his autobiography, it became a public fashion. It was indeed very much more public than secret for a time, And it was the custom for Freemasons to parade the streets of London once a year in their aprons because it drew most of its members from the wealthy middle classes. Freemasonry was, and in most Protestant countries still is, eminently respectable. What? Because it drew most of its members from the wealthy middle classes, Freemasonry was, and in the most Protestant countries still is, immensely respectable. Protestants and the Catholics, eh? There's a difference in them. The Catholics, I think, don't like the Protestants because the KJV is the Protestant Bible, isn't it? It's Anglican. But I think maybe the Catholic people are like, you can't fucking put the truth in the first page in plain sight, and maybe that was like, they didn't like that. Anyway, the first three Grand Masters in England were a gentleman, a civil servant, and a scientist, but the fourth was a duke. Since then, the Grand Master has often been a member of the royal family, the most highly placed being the Prince of Wales, King Edward VII, and the Duke of York, King George VI. As the precepts of Freemasonry required, the English lodges held aloof from religious and political controversy and what? Aloof from. God. As the precepts of Freemasonry required, the English lodges held aloof from religious and political controversy and supported the orthodoxy of the age. The Hanoverian monarchy, the parliamentary constitution, and religious toleration under the passive Aggies of the Church of England. On the continent of Europe, the history of Freemasonry was far more turbulent, controversial, and complicated. Speculative Freemasonry crossed the Channel soon after its establishment in 1717. A lodge was founded in 1725 by a group of English noblemen and gentry who were staying in Paris. But in the eyes of the Bourbons and other absolute monarchs, the essential Masonic idea of tolerance was, by definition, subversive and dangerous. In 1737, Louis XV issued an edict forbidding all loyal subjects to have anything to do with Freemasonry. In the ensuing decades, repression was intermittent. Lodges often met freely, but at intervals they were raided by the police, and Freemasons were imprisoned. Freemasonry met similar opposition in Spain, in the Kingdom of Naples, and elsewhere. In Germany and Austria, however, there were monarchs who sympathized with the spirit of tolerance and philosophical. This is important. In Germany and Austria, however, there were monarchs who sympathized with the spirit of tolerance and philosophical inquiry, and looked with favor on the growing lodges. Frederick the Great, 1740 to 86, was largely responsible for introducing Freemasonry into Persia and was himself Grand Master, while the rulers of various other German states and the Emperor Francis I of Austria were also Freemasons. It has been suggested that Mozart, who was an ardent Freemason, alluded to this state of affairs in his opera The Magic Flute in 1791. Particularly to the protection of the Freemasons by the liberal Emperor Joseph II and the hostility of the Empress Maria Theresa, that's a name. The story of Freemasonry in the 18th century is confused by the fact that several schools of thought in several religious and political forces influenced and infiltrated the lodges. The greatest stir was caused by a succession of mystics, among whom is hard to distinguish the men of genuine faith and learning, the cranks and neurotics, and finally, the charlatans and swindlers. Is that me? The greatest stir was caused by a succession of mystics, among whom it is hard to distinguish the men of genuine faith and learning, the cranks and neurotics, and finally, the charlatans and swindlers. By this time, Freemasonry had absorbed something of the Hermetic Kabbalist tradition and had begun to relate itself to ancient Egyptian mystery cults. In reverence for good religion of the Egyptians, finds full, what the fuck? Its reverence for the good religion of the Egyptians finds full expression in Mozart's Magic Flute, in which the Masonic tradition is identified with the Egyptian tradition, and souls make their way to salvation through the mysteries of Isis and Osiris. While some lodges adopted Rosicrucian mysticism and studied the Kabbalah, others adopted Rosicrucian magic and devoted themselves to practical alchemy, following John Schrempfer of Nuremberg, who claimed that he could make gold and exorcise spirits. He can make gold on the ceiling. You know The Rock, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, when he was, they had like a 30-minute YouTube video of him saying he has COVID, and he's sitting in a room with a gold ceiling. The Rock has COVID-19, which you can spell from the initial 69 on the Roman numerals in the Stairway to Heaven, using 19 steps. You can spell COVID-19, but then the gold is in the middle. Anyways, gold on the ceiling. Alchemy. Alchemy is what's that? When you make gold. Anyway, in Germany and Russia, and especially in France, considerable success was gained by the extraordinary Count Cagliostro, 1743 to 95, whose claims were unlimited. He offered the ability to make gold, effect miraculous cures, prolong sexual powers, dominate the world of spirits, and extend life to a span of 5,557 years. 55, eh? Fuck, if I lived to 38, 58, that'd be something. Caligostro, whatever, who dominated the Lion Lodge. Yeah, Lion is a street in Ottawa. Anyway, created his own brand of Egyptian Masonry, which included women's lodges, presided over a Queen of Sheba. That's where the Queen of Sheba comes from? Whoa. Caligostro, who dominated the Lion Lodge, created his own brand of Egyptian Masonry, which included women's lodges, presided over by a Queen of Sheba. A Queen of Sheba. Holy fuck. Oh my god, this is gonna take forever. Oh my god, it keeps going. The innovation brought about by these influences was the addition of the higher degrees, which did not exist in medieval Masonry or in Anderson's constitutions. These degrees, which we have mentioned, include the Roy's Croix degrees, recalling the ancient mystery cults, and revived orders of chivalry. They were the cause of disputes and schisms among Freemasons, especially in France, where there were two rival centers of authority, the Grand Orient, which favored higher degrees, the Grand Lodge, which did not. An uneasy reunion was effected in 1773 under the Grand Mastership of the Duc d'Orléans, 1747 to 93, who later renounced his title and played a major role in the French Revolution under the name of Philippe Egatelet. An important influence in various French lodges was that of Scottish Jacobites living in exile in France, and particularly of a Scotsman called Michael Ramsay, the Chevalier Ramsay, as he called himself. His aim was evidently to get sympathy and money from Freemasons for the restoration of the Stuart dynasty. His method was to form groups within Freemasonry by recruiting the Scottish Rites, of which he was perhaps the inventor. Whoa. His method was to form groups within Freemasonry by recruiting to the Scottish Rites, of which he was perhaps the inventor. Ramsay himself came from the Kilwinning, and he claimed that the Kilwinning Lodge was the oldest in Masonic history and that it had always been concealed with the Knights of Malta. Though this was a fantasy, and though the new system of degrees gained few adherents in Scotland, it became very popular in Europe. Yeah. Keep going.